I never imagined cementing my neighbor's illegal wells would expose a massive HOA corruption scheme and transform my inherited property forever. How would you react when you discover your land is being secretly exploited by the very people claiming to protect your community? I nearly dropped my coffee mug when I spotted the huge drilling machine rumbling across my back field. Two men in hard hats were measuring something while a third was marking the ground with bright orange spray paint. I blinked hard, thinking maybe I was still half asleep, but no, strangers with heavy equipment were definitely trespassing on my land. "Hey," I shouted, jogging toward them. "What do you think you're doing on my property?" The tallest worker looked up, completely unbothered, setting up to drill a well. "Sir, a well on my land? Who gave you permission?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out some folded papers. "Pine Grove Estates HOA. Got all the paperwork right here." I snatched the documents from his hand. Sure enough, there was an official-looking permit with the HOA logo stamped at the top. According to this paper, they had permission to drill water wells on the eastern boundary of my property. "This has to be a mistake," I said. "I never agreed to this." The worker shrugged. "Not our problem, buddy. We just go where they tell us." My grandfather had left me this 5-acre property when he passed away last year. It sat right next to Pine Grove Estates, a fancy neighborhood with big houses and even bigger rules. I'd never joined their HOA since my property existed before their development was even built. "Look, you need to pack up and leave now," I insisted. "I don't care what that paper says, this is private property." The worker sighed and pulled out his phone. "Let me call the HOA president. She can clear this up." 20 minutes later, a shiny black SUV pulled up to my gate. A woman with perfectly styled hair and designer sunglasses stepped out. She marched toward us like she owned the place. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Denise Carter, president of Pine Grove Estates Homeowners Association." She didn't offer to shake my hand. "I understand there's some confusion." "There's no confusion," I replied. "These men are trespassing, and I want them off my property now." Denise's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Actually, when your grandfather sold the adjacent land to our developers 10 years ago, he signed an easement agreement. During water emergencies, the HOA can access the aquifer under your property. We're in the middle of a severe drought, as I'm sure you've noticed." "I never heard about any easement," I said, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "It's all perfectly legal," she continued, pulling out another document with my grandfather's signature at the bottom. "One emergency well is permitted under Section 5, Paragraph 3. I read the fine print, and she was right. There was an easement for one emergency well, but something felt off. "This says one well, not multiple." I pointed out, noticing more orange markings scattered across my field. Denise waved her hand dismissively. "The situation has escalated. Our lawyers have determined that the spirit of the agreement allows for multiple access points during severe shortages." "That's not what it says," I insisted. "Feel free to contact our attorneys," she replied, already turning to leave. "Meanwhile, we'll proceed as planned. The community needs water." As I watched her drive away, the workers started unloading more equipment. Something didn't add up. We'd had some dry weather, but nothing I'd call a severe emergency. My own well was working fine. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of machinery kept me awake as they worked under floodlights. By morning, they had drilled one complete well and started on a second location. I called the county water authority and asked about any declared water emergencies. The clerk seemed confused. "No official emergency has been declared, sir. We're at a level 1 conservation stage, which just means voluntary restrictions on lawn watering." Now, I was really suspicious. I drove into Pine Grove Estates to look around. For a community supposedly facing a water crisis, their grass looked amazingly green. Sprinklers were running at several houses, and a crew was filling the community pool. Then I spotted a sign by the entrance, "Coming soon, Pine Grove Estates, luxury, water features, and resident lake." I snapped a picture with my phone. This wasn't about an emergency. They wanted my water for decorative fountains and a fake lake. When I got home, 3 drilling teams were now working on my property. A different neighbor, Gary Peterson, from down the street, was watching from my driveway. "Impressive project they're putting in," he said when I approached. "You know about this?" I asked. Gary nodded. "Denise announced it at the last meeting, said they finally got permission to tap the aquifer for the new amenities. Property values will go up at least 15% with those water features." My blood boiled. "She told me this was for an emergency water shortage." Gary laughed. "Shortage of luxury, maybe. My wife Lisa is on the landscaping committee. They've been planning this for months." I thanked him for the information and went inside to call a lawyer. Attorney David Green agreed to see me that afternoon. "Based on what you've told me," David said, after reviewing the documents, "they're clearly exceeding the easement allowance. The agreement specifies 1 well for emergency use only. So I can stop them?" I asked hopefully. "Yes, but not instantly. We'll need to file for an injunction, which could take a week or more." He looked at me sympathetically. "Meanwhile, I suggest you document everything. Take photos, record conversations, keep a log of all activities." By the time I got home, they had completed 3 wells and started drilling a 4th. Workers were now laying pipes across my property, tearing up my garden, and damaging trees my grandfather had planted decades ago. I took pictures of every inch of destruction. That's when I noticed something odd. The pipes weren't heading toward Pine Grove Estates. They led to an empty field on the other side of my property. I followed the pipe trail and discovered survey stakes with a sign, "Future site of Lakeview Mall and Entertainment Complex." Were they selling my water to commercial developers? I took more pictures, my hands shaking with anger. That night, I received an official-looking letter from the HOA. It contained a list of violations on my property: overgrown grass, improper fence height, unauthorized structures with potential fines totaling thousands of dollars. This was war, but how could I fight back against their money and connections? I stared out my window at the drilling rigs, illuminated in the darkness. The easement mentioned wells, but it said nothing about what could happen to those wells after they were drilled. I started researching. At 5 in the morning, I watched from my kitchen window as Denise Carter herself drove onto my property to inspect the drilling progress. 4 wells were now complete, with 3 more marked for excavation. She walked around with a clipboard pointing and giving orders like she owned my land. When she spotted me watching, she waved cheerfully. The nerve of that woman made my stomach turn. After she left, I called a buddy who worked in construction. "Hey Mike, I need a cement mixer today." "Planning a patio?" he asked. "Something like that," I replied. "Also, how much concrete would it take to fill a vertical shaft about 8 inches wide and 40 feet deep?" Mike whistled. "That's oddly specific. You're talking about a lot of material. What exactly are you up to?" "Just exploring my options," I said. While waiting for Mike to drop off the mixer, I drove to 3 different hardware stores in neighboring towns, buying bags of quick-setting concrete at each. I didn't want anyone connecting my purchases back home. I carefully read through the easement agreement for the 10th time. It granted the HOA permission to drill for water in emergencies, but it said absolutely nothing about what I could do with my own property afterward. There was no guarantee of ongoing access or maintenance rights. I was mixing my first batch of concrete when Lisa Peterson, Gary's wife, showed up at my door. "I heard you had questions about our water project," she said, trying to peek around me into my garage As a member of the landscaping committee, I wanted to clear up any confusion. That's thoughtful, I replied, blocking her view. Maybe you can explain why Denise told me this was for an emergency when you've actually been planning luxury water features. Lisa shifted uncomfortably. Well, it's complicated. The drought is real, but we're also thinking ahead to community improvements. She lowered her voice. Between us, the board has been collecting special assessment fees for these amenities for years. Members would be furious if they didn't deliver something spectacular. And the shopping mall? I asked. Her eyes widened. What shopping mall? The one they're running pipes to from my property. Lisa looked genuinely confused. Our plans only include features within Pine Grove Estates. There's nothing about selling water elsewhere. Interesting. The HOA board was keeping secrets even from their committees. I thanked Lisa for stopping by and closed the door before she could ask what was in my garage. That night, I waited until 2:00 a.m., when the drilling crews had gone home. The security guard they'd posted was asleep in his truck. I quietly wheeled the cement mixer to the first completed well. Working as quickly and quietly as possible, I mixed and poured batch after batch of concrete down the shaft. The thick grey mixture disappeared into the darkness. I added broken chunks of metal junk, old pipes and fittings to help the concrete set around irregular shapes. It would be nearly impossible to drill through this mess. I finished filling the first well just before dawn and covered the evidence. No one would know until they tried to install the pumping equipment. The next day, the crews continued working on the new wells, completely unaware of what I had done. I repeated my concrete operation for the next 2 nights, filling each completed well with a solid plug of cement and metal. On the 4th morning, I was awakened by furious pounding on my door. Denise stood there with 2 men in suits. "We need to talk right now," she demanded, pushing past me into my house. "Our crews report that the first 3 wells have been sabotaged, dear." I feigned surprise. "Sabotaged? How?" "Don't play dumb," she snapped. "Someone has filled them with concrete. The drilling company can't proceed until we figure this out." I shrugged. "That's terrible, but I don't see how it concerns me." "It's your property," Denise fumed. "You're responsible for securing the work site." "Actually," I replied calmly, "I never granted permission for these wells in the first place. The easement doesn't make me responsible for security." One of the men in suits stepped forward. "I'm attorney Mark Davis, the HOA attorney. This sabotage has cost the association over $50,000 already. We'll be adding that to the violations notice you received." "Speaking of that notice," I said, "I've been taking pictures of my property weekly for years. I can prove those violations didn't exist before your crews started tearing up my land." The second man spoke up. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Detective Collins. Vandalism of this scale could be a felony offense." "That's interesting," I replied, "because I've been documenting everything that's happened on my property." I pulled out my phone and showed them photos of the pipes leading to the future mall site. "I'm curious why emergency drought wells are connected to a commercial development. The County Water Authority told me no emergency has been declared." Denise's face turned pale. She glanced nervously at her lawyer. "Also," I continued, "I've been recording our conversations. This wasn't entirely true, but they didn't know that. Including when you admitted to exceeding the single well limit of the easement." The detective looked at Denise with raised eyebrows. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered. "We have legal rights to access that aquifer for one emergency well. I corrected her. "Not 7 wells, for fountains and a private lake, and definitely not for selling water to mall developers." Attorney Mark Davis whispered something to Denise, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Perhaps we can discuss a compromise," she finally said. "I don't think so," I replied. "My attorney has already filed for an emergency injunction." The County Water Board and Environmental Protection Office are also very interested in unauthorized aquifer access. Detective Collins jotted something in his notebook. I think I need to look into these allegations before proceeding with any vandalism investigation. After they left, I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. My hands were shaking. I'd stood my ground, but this was far from over. Denise wouldn't give up easily. There was too much money at stake. That afternoon, I caught one of the drilling crew workers taking pictures of my garage where the cement mixer was stored. Hours later, I noticed an unfamiliar car driving slowly past my house. Someone was watching me. My phone rang. It was David, my lawyer. "Good news and bad news," he said. "The judge is interested in our case, but can't see us until next week. Meanwhile, I've discovered something concerning. The Pine Grove HOA has deep connections with the county zoning board. They've fast-tracked permits that normally take months. So they have people in their pocket," I sighed. "Looks that way. We need more evidence of their real intentions and something to get the public's attention." After hanging up, I walked my property line thinking. 3 wells were now filled with concrete, but 4 more were either completed or in progress. I couldn't keep playing defense. That's when I saw it. A large water tanker truck filling up at one of the wells. The logo on its side read, "Evergreen Development Corporation." I quickly took pictures as it drove away, then followed at a safe distance. The truck led me straight to the empty field, where they were breaking ground for the new mall. Workers were unloading the water into temporary storage tanks. They weren't waiting for the pipes to be completed. They were already selling my water. I called David immediately and sent him the photos. "This might be the evidence we need," he said. "I'm contacting the environmental regulators right now." When I returned home, I found Denise and attorney Mark Davis waiting in my driveway. "We're prepared to offer you compensation," Denise said, forcing a smile. "The HOA will pay you $5,000 for the inconvenience." "That's generous," I replied sarcastically, "considering you're selling my water for much more than that." Attorney Mark Davis cleared his throat. "We're also willing to waive all HOA violation fees." "I'm not part of your HOA," I reminded them. "You have no authority over my property." Denise's fake smile vanished. "Listen carefully. This project will happen whether you cooperate or not. The board has invested too much to back down. If you continue interfering, there will be consequences." "Are you threatening me?" I asked. "I'm being realistic," she replied coldly. "We have resources and connections you can't imagine. Don't force us to use them." As they drove away, I noticed Gary Peterson watching from across the street. He approached cautiously. "Be careful, he warned. "Denise doesn't play fair." Last year, a homeowner who fought her landscaping rules suddenly found himself facing building code violations that nearly bankrupted him. "Thanks for the warning," I said, "but I'm not backing down." That night, as I prepared to cement another well, I heard a noise outside. Flashlight beams swept across my yard. Security guards were now patrolling around the clock. How could I finish what I started with them watching? And what would Denise do next to force me into submission? The stakes were getting higher. I needed a new strategy, and fast. My hands shook as I looked at the photos of my land being torn apart. 7 wells. Not 1, not 3, but 7 wells stealing water from under my property. I couldn't sleep that night, my mind racing with fury and helplessness. What could one person do against an entire HOA board? At 3 a.m., I sat bolt upright in bed. I knew exactly what to do. I called my cousin Mike, who works in construction. "I need a cement mixer," I whispered into the phone, "and I need it without questions." By dawn, we had a plan. I drove to 3 different hardware stores across the county, buying bags of quick-setting cement at each one. Nobody would track large purchases. from a single location. Mike arrived with his mixer truck just as the neighborhood grew quiet after morning rush hour. "You sure about this?" he asked, eyeing the drilling equipment scattered across my back acreage. I nodded, pulling on work gloves. They left me no choice. This is my property, my grandfather's legacy. I'm not letting them steal it. We started with the newest, furthest from the road. I mixed the first batch of cement, extra thick, adding metal rebar pieces for good measure. The grey sludge poured down the hole with a satisfying gurgle. 1 done, 6 to go. By noon, we had sealed 4 wells completely. The 5th one was trickier. They'd already installed some piping. Mike helped me pull it out before we filled that hole too. "Someone's coming," Mike warned, pointing to a cloud of dust from the access road. "Keep going," I said, mixing the next batch faster. "We need to finish." As we poured cement down the 6th well, I heard car doors slamming. Denise's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Stop what you're doing right now." I turned to see her marching toward us, designer heels sinking into the soft dirt. Behind her, Steve Evans and 2 other board members hurried to keep up. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Denise demanded, her face turning an alarming shade of red. I kept pouring cement. "Home improvement." "On our wells," she shrieked. "On my property," I corrected, meeting her gaze steadily. "Wells that exceed the single emergency access point permitted in the easement." Steve pushed forward. "You have no idea who you're messing with. The HOA will bury you in legal fees." "Interesting choice of words," I replied, watching the cement disappear down the hole, considering what I'm doing right now. Denise pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police." "Please do," I said, pulling a folder from my truck. "Then you can explain why you approved 7 wells when the easement allows for 1. You can also explain why the emergency drought measures are actually funding your private water park project." Her finger froze above her phone. "What are you talking about?" I handed her printouts of the blueprints I'd photographed through Steve's window. "Board members' exclusive retreat doesn't sound like emergency water access to me." Steve lunged for the papers. "Where did you get those?" Mike stepped between us. "Careful now," I continued calmly. "I also have recordings of your threats about finding me if I didn't cooperate." My lawyer found it very interesting. The 3rd well finished setting as we talked. Mike moved to start on the final one. "You can't do this," Denise hissed. The community needs water during emergencies," I interrupted, "not luxury pools for board members." A white truck pulled up behind the board members' cars. A man in a county water authority uniform stepped out, followed by a police officer. "Perfect timing," I said, waving them over. "I called them this morning to report unauthorized aquifer drilling." So Denise's face changed from angry to panicked. "This is a private HOA matter." "Actually," the water authority official said, checking his clipboard, "drilling into the aquifer requires county permits, which you don't have. And according to property maps, you're operating on private land without proper easements." The police officer asked everyone to step back. We received reports of trespassing and property damage. Steve tried to explain, but his words jumbled together as he realized their scheme was unraveling. I watched as the final batch of cement poured into the 7th well, feeling oddly calm. "Officer," I said, "I have documentation showing the HOA exceeded their legal access to my property." As Denise and Steve argued with the officials, Mike finished cleaning the mixer. "Your wells are permanently closed," I told the board members as the cement hardened under the warm sun. "Just like your special water park plans." Denise glared at me with hatred in her eyes. "This isn't over." The police officer stepped between us. "Ma'am, I'll need you and the board members to come to the station to answer some questions about these unauthorized wells." As they were led away, I noticed neighbors gathering at the edge of my property, whispering and pointing. For the first time in this whole ordeal, I felt truly worried. What would happen now? The cement was set, but my future in this community suddenly seemed uncertain. The local news van, parked outside my house, jolted me awake. It had been 3 weeks since I cemented those wells, and my life had turned upside down. Camera crews followed me to get groceries. Neighbors stopped talking when I walked by my mailbox, overflowed with letters, some threatening, some thanking me. "You're trending on social media," my lawyer David explained during our morning call. "People are calling you the Cement Avenger." I groaned. "I just wanted to protect my property." "Well, you did more than that. The county investigation uncovered something big." I clicked on the local news website. The headline made my jaw drop. Sunset Valley HOA scandal board sold water rights to developers during fake drought. According to the article, Denise and the board had created a fake water emergency to justify drilling on my land. They planned to sell water to construction companies working on a massive development 2 miles away. The members' retreat was just a cover story. My phone rang constantly that day. Reporters, lawyers, even the mayor. "I need you at the emergency town hall meeting tonight," the mayor insisted. "People want answers." I almost didn't go. What would I say to an angry crowd? But at 7:00 p.m., I found myself walking into the packed community center. The room hushed as I entered. To my surprise, many residents nodded respectfully. An elderly woman patted the seat next to her. "I knew your grandfather," she whispered as I sat down. "He would be proud." The meeting was chaos. Former board members blamed each other. Residents demanded refunds for emergency water fees. County officials explained violation after violation. Then Denise burst through the doors, expensive lawyer at her side. "This is a witch hunt," she shouted above the noise. "Everything we did was for property values." "You mean for your bank account?" someone yelled back. Denise spotted me and pointed dramatically. "This person destroyed community property. They should be arrested." The mayor called for order. "Ms. Carter, the wells were drilled without proper permits on private property. The county has already ruled on this matter." Denise's lawyer tried to argue, but the evidence was overwhelming. The County Water Authority director presented documents showing payments from developers to Denise's private consulting company. "We estimate they would have drained the aquifer by 23% in the first year alone," he explained, showing maps of my property. "These illegal wells could have permanently damaged the water table for the entire region." A small commotion at the back of the room caught everyone's attention. Emily Evans pushed through the crowd, dragging her husband Steve by the arm. "Tell them," she demanded, pushing him toward the microphone. Steve looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Denise promised us all a cut," he admitted shakily. "The drought wasn't real. We made it up to justify emergency measures." The room erupted. Meeting minutes were presented, showing the board voted to manufacture the water crisis. Financial records revealed where the money went. By midnight, the county commissioners made their decision. Denise and 3 board members would face criminal charges. The HOA charter would be suspended pending a complete overhaul. I slipped out quietly during the confusion, exhausted by it all. What would happen to my land now, to my life here? 2 months passed in a blur of legal meetings and paperwork. I woke one Saturday to find a group of neighbors at my front door. "We need to talk about your land," said a woman who introduced herself as the head of the neighborhood transition committee. My heart sank. "I'm not selling." "We don't want you to sell," she explained. "We want to apologize and make things right." They proposed a new plan. The back portion of my property, where the wells had been drilled, would become a community nature preserve with my permission. I would retain ownership, but grant a proper limited conservation easement. The cement, I asked cautiously. Stays, the woman said, as a reminder of what happens when people abuse power. 4 months later, I couldn't believe my eyes. Dozens of volunteers worked across my back acreage, planting native trees around the cemented well caps. Each cap now had a small plaque explaining what had happened there. Emily Evans approached me carrying bottled water. Her husband Steve was serving community service hours, pulling invasive weeds nearby. The Water Conservation Center plans are finished, she said, showing me drawings for a small education building. We're naming it after your grandfather, if that's okay. I nodded, watching children carefully placing river rocks around a rain garden. The county hydrologist says, your actions saved the aquifer, Emily continued. The new HOA charter includes strict water protection measures. No board can ever do this again. A reporter from an environmental magazine stood nearby, taking photos. Would you share your story for our cover? She asked. People need to know they can stand up to corruption. Before I could answer, Denise's luxury SUV roared past my property. She no longer lived in Sunset Valley after pleading guilty to fraud charges. She slowed down to glare at the community project, then sped away in a cloud of dust. She still doesn't get it, Emily sighed. This was never about the money or property values. It was about doing what's right. As the afternoon faded into evening, we gathered around the largest cemented well cap for the preserve dedication. The mayor handed me a small golden key to the information kiosk. Sometimes, he said to the assembled neighbors, it takes one person's courage to remind us all what community really means. I looked across what had once been my grandfather's quiet piece of land. Now it buzzed with activity. Bird watchers, children learning about water cycles, families enjoying nature trails. I never wanted to be at war with my neighbors, I told the crowd. I just wanted to protect what was mine. An older gentleman nodded. And in doing so, you protected what was ours too. The cement had hardened around those illegal wells, but something else had softened. The hearts of people who remembered what it meant to be true neighbors. Every cemented well now stood as a monument to standing up for what's right, even when you stand alone. As twilight settled over the preserve, I walked home along the new community path that respectfully curved around my private space. Someone had placed a small sign at the border. Thank you for teaching us the difference between taking and sharing. My grandfather would have liked that, I thought. Sometimes you need to shut some doors firmly to open better ones. This story teaches us the vital importance of knowing your rights and standing up against corruption, even when facing powerful opponents. It shows that seemingly small actions can have massive ripple effects, and that protecting what is rightfully yours can in turn protect the wider community and its resources. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of community and resilience.